Recognize Representative Ted Deutch of Florida, who's the chair of the Subcommittee on the Middle East, North Africa, and Global Counterterrorism, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate you being here today. And we do need to look back. This is a really important hearing, but we also need to look forward. The reality is we have a Taliban government. We have terrorist groups already surging. Potential threats to U.S. interests remain. It is true that we are not the world's policeman, but we know that a strengthened ISIS-K or al-Qaeda pose a threat not only to the U.S. homeland, but to Americans abroad, our interests abroad, and the region. The Middle East and North Africa in particular were fundamentally changed in the aftermath of 9/11 with the rise of al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates. We clearly can't trust the Taliban to keep terrorists at bay. So, Mr. Secretary, you traveled to Doha to conduct diplomatic talks with partners and allies on our continued counterterrorism role. What do you assess to be the operational capacities of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan? And how is the administration planning to hold the Taliban to its commitment to ensure that al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups are unable to use Afghan soil to plan terrorist attacks on or threaten the security of the U.S. and our allies?
Thank you very much. A few things on this. First, as we were discussing a little bit earlier, as you know from your focus on this, the terrorist threat has metastasized significantly from 9/11, and it is much more acute now in terms of potential threats to the homeland and threats beyond the countries in question from Somalia, from Yemen, from Libya, Iraq, Syria, a number of other countries in Africa as well. And so we have to be able to make sure that we're focused everywhere. That's a possibility, and resourced appropriately. And we are. And in a number of those places, as you know very well, we don't have boots on the ground, but we find ways to deal with that threat, including with over-the-horizon capabilities. In the case of Afghanistan, a couple of things. The current assessment of the intelligence community is that long ago, al-Qaeda was so significantly degraded that it's not in a position to conduct externally directed attacks. But we will remain hyper-vigilant about any reemergence of that threat. And we will be working closely with partners and other countries to be in a position to do that. I think the chairman referenced earlier that we hope and expect in the near future to be able to do some classified briefings on this, because there are a number of things that it would not be appropriate to discuss in this setting.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and we appreciate your commitment to ensuring that those classified briefings occur. Secretary Blinken, the war in Afghanistan was the first mission in the history of NATO arising out of the invocation of Article 5. There are over 50 NATO members and partner countries sent troops. 36, it's been reported, had troops there at the time of the drawdown. They invested political capital, our allies invested political capital and funds, and certainly troops. And often those troops gave their lives as well. The criticism that we've heard from some of our allies is that there was not adequate consultation and coordination with our NATO allies. We heard the Secretary General of NATO say just this week that there was. Others doubted that. I'd like you to speak to that, but finally this. We had an administration, Mr. Secretary, that wanted to go it alone, a president who failed to appreciate and often criticized the importance of NATO allies while embracing Xi and Putin. If you could also, in your final time with me, speak to, at a time when democratic values are being threatened and at risk in so many places around the world, if you could also speak to the importance of that transatlantic relationship and how to reassure those allies of ours who have raised concerns about how we went about pulling out of Afghanistan and about failing to coordinate with them as we did.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of things. First, you're so right to point to our allies and partners who stood with us on 9/11 and in all the days and time thereafter. And you're exactly right that Article 5 of NATO, an attack on one is an attack on all, in essence, was invoked for the very first time in its history in our defense by our allies and partners, something that I will never forget, and I suspect no one on this video conference today will ever forget. And we determined that when it came to Afghanistan, we went in together, and we would go out together. And that's exactly what we did. I engaged with the Secretary of Defense in intense consultations with our NATO partners well before the president made his decision, going to Brussels for a special session of the North Atlantic Council and listening intently to every single partner, relaying what we heard directly to President Biden to factor that into our thinking and into our planning. I've spent more time in Brussels, either in person or virtually, than in any other place since I've been on this job, working very closely with these allies and partners. On the day that the president's decision was announced, I was back in Brussels with the Secretary of Defense, and NATO immediately and unanimously endorsed that decision. Now, in the discussions and conversations that we had throughout this time, including individual conversations, people brought various perspectives to the table, but each recognized that given the deadline that existed, that is, that our forces had to depart Afghanistan by May 1st, pursuant to the agreement negotiated by the previous administration, that the alternative, should we choose to stay, was for the Taliban to resume attacks, not just on us, but on our NATO partners and allies, as well as to engage in this countrywide offensive that we've seen to retake the major cities, in effect, to re-up the war. And all unanimously endorsed the proposition that we would leave together, and that's exactly what we worked on doing and what we've been doing. I know from talking to many allies and partners the tremendous solidarity we saw together at the Kabul airport, working to help each other to make sure that we could get out our fellow nationals, Afghans who had helped each of us, and our embassy personnel. I heard a lot of gratitude from allies and partners about the work that our folks did in making sure that we could deliver on that commitment to them. So from my perspective, at least, there was tremendous and genuine consultation with allies and partners throughout this process. And going forward, right now, we are deeply engaged with them at NATO and in other organizations on working together on the way forward to collectively hold the Taliban to the commitments that it's made to the international community.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania.